knowledge, matheme, and progressively, in fact, disparition of the subject in the sense of the subject in the first part of it's something else. It's something else, and the substitution of the question of jouissance to the question of desire is very important. And finally, there is ambiguity because all this way can be said anti-philosophic nature, but can be said also of philosophic nature. Absolutely, I agree with you on this point. And but with complement that if the way of Lacan is finally of philosophic nature, it's in a way which is much more, in my opinion, of classical philosophical nature than Hegelian philosophical nature. Something like that. Much more Descartes or Plato or Aristotle than Hegel. And we can note that Hegel was very important in the first part of the work of Lacan. There was a constant discussion with Hegel at the beginning of Lacan and not at the end. My second advice. And to finish, you know, I think that the simple conviction that there is somewhere a distance without measure is not by itself sufficient to give a definition of the anti-philosopher, because we must add this distance cannot be proved or experimented inside a conceptual framework. This is the second part. And it is why when somebody says that I am an anti-philosopher because, in a certain sense, I admit that there exists a distance without measure, which is finally the distance between individuals and subject. An immanent distance between individual and subject, which is without measure. Why? Because to become the subject he or her is able of, the individual must be transformed by something which is not reducible to him or her, and the name of which is event. An event is really something which creates a new possibility, and this new possibility is the possibility for the individual to become a subject. All this machinery is a machinery which implies that there exists something like a distance without measure. But it's not true that this distance without measure implies by obligation that no conceptual means have been able to think this distance. And so I am not an anti-philosopher in some sense, but a philosopher of the distance itself. A philosopher of the distance itself. And so the philosopher which is very near the anti-philosopher, because he says, as the philosopher, that there exists that sort of distance which in the common world is without measure between individual and subject, which is also the distance without measure, for example, between democracy and communism.
Listen, I hope, sorry. I propose that I will literally just reply in 20 seconds because I think it's the time to pretend that we are in democracy and so on. Yeah. First, just to literally two remarks. First, I deeply agree with you, this wonderful formula, yes, absolute distance, but within philosophy. You, my friend, provided the best definition of what Hegel wants here. You see, like, okay, this is Hegel for me. Second point, you know, it's nonetheless more, I see your wonderful point about the difference between Kantian criticism and anti-philosophy. But you know, there is a path from Kant. For example, when you say personal, but already Fichte make that step, you know, when he says what philosophy you choose depends on what type of a man you are. There he is the first to directly refer to a non-conceptual person. So, as it may surprise you, but as I promised, I stop now. I know it's strange, but I stop. Merci beaucoup. C'est très belle formule, ça. Distance, mais comme philosophe. Did you do a good communist job to undermine bourgeois democracy? You wrote them and distributed the question in advance. Okay. I knew you would. Somehow I knew it would be you. Do you need maybe? Yes, you do. For the working classes back there.
Absolutely. And for the lumpen proletariat.
Fundamental to your two approaches to ontology. Despite there being a certain amount of overlap, nonetheless, I think there are some important discrepancies that would warrant discussion here. And what's interesting is Lacan in the 19th seminar, 1971 to 1972, just before he went downhill, according to you slightly, he, in one of those sessions, is talking about two of his, for lack of a better word, what we could call axioms that are linked to one another. The first, le grand autre n'existe pas, the big other does not exist. And then, il y a de le, there is the one. And when he's talking about these, he makes a remark, just a passing aside, where he says, somebody someday is going to make an ontology out of what I am talking about right now. And arguably, both of you seem to be philosophers, or, for instance, Bruno Bostiels calls you an anti-philosopher slightly, but both of you are philosophers who clearly your projects in certain ways involve developing this. Now, how do each of you see yourselves in terms of being able to, say, pass through Lacan's maybe anti-philosophy, but it's a bit ambiguous, passing through Lacan and developing an ontology? What do you see as the crucial differences between the two of you in terms of how, with those sorts of remarks Lacan is making when he predicts that someone is going to base an ontology off of this, how do you feel that the two of you fundamentally differ, apropos your, you might say, philosophical development or deployment of these resources of Lacanianism?
Non, je te passe la parole.
Non, pas assez. J'ai pas compris la fin de la question. Tu me résumes la question?
Lacan dit que quelqu'un dans le futur va développer une ontologie de ce que je dis.
Oui.
Donc, est-ce que c'est nous deux qui le font et quelle est la différence entre nous?
Oui, mais
c'est une question de semer la différence dans la force du peuple, ce qu'il essaie de faire.
Yes, you know, the question of the relationship between Lacan and ontology is a very obscure question, in fact, not simple. The book of François Balmès is a book concerning, in fact, the question of the relationship between Lacan and the question of being entirely. And he finds many, many suggestions in the text of Lacan, contradictories and so on. I think that a very important point, I think, in Lacan himself is the question of the forms of negativity. What is finally the theory of Lacan concerning nothingness? It's probably more important than to be immediately in face of the question of the conviction of Lacan concerning being, the affirmative ontology of Lacan. But there is many passages which concern the forms of negativity. First, the lack, but in some sense, the access to the rest, and so on. All that. And I think that it is the reason for which I affirm that all contemporary philosophers must be in discussion with Lacan. Not because Lacan is properly or exactly a philosopher, but because the question of what is a possible ontology today is transformed by Lacan, by the work of Lacan. And so my answer is yes. I think that the common point, one of the common points between Slavoj and me, is the fact that for us, the learning of Lacan, the lesson of Lacan, is of fundamental importance. We can disagree and so on the details, but and it's not so true in the contemporary context, because many philosophers in the contemporary context are explicitly against Lacan. Deleuze first, but many others. And it's the first point. In fact, there is we have two common points, and even if I am the master and Slavoj the hysterical type, it's not completely true, maybe.
Now you sound a little bit hysterical.
Well, yeah. But I recognize that you have the seduction of the hysterical. No, but we have I think three points. First, the conviction that philosophy exists, but it's not the common idea today. The conviction that the philosophy exists, and a variation concerning this point is that we have the conviction that Hegel is alive, is not dead. We are not the same Hegel, maybe, but yeah, we can see that in the text. Hegel is of great importance for us. It's the first point. Philosophy exists, and as a consequence, Hegel exists. Second point, the question of revolution, communism, and so on is not dead. So we don't affirm the death of the sequence of the two last centuries. We know problems, difficulties in passes, and so on. But our subjective conviction is that there is here something to continue. Something to continue, maybe in the dark, but to continue. To continue in the dark is not the same thing that to stop. The second point, no, I finish. Sorry. Not between the second and the third point. And